pull up. Grab the fuel nozzle and get ready to fuel up on trends and strategies to grow your travel center business in this episode of The Truck Stops Here, brought to you by the NATSO Foundation. Now, here's your host, Amy Toner.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Truck Stops Here. I'm your host, Amy Toner. Lucky me, I have my sometimes co-host, Darren Schulte. Hey, Darren.
Hi, Amy. How are you today?
I'm good. Darren is the VP of Membership at NATSO, and we're lucky to have him. You're listening to The Truck Stops Here, the NATSO Foundation's podcast. The NATSO Foundation is research, education, and public outreach subsidiary of NATSO. The podcast is just one of the many educational tools the foundation creates. Today, I'm also lucky to have my guest, Randy Grizzle. He's the Director of Sales and Marketing with TACenergy. Hey, Randy.
Hey, Amy. Thank you so much for having me.
TACenergy, as everyone hopefully knows, collaborated with the NATSO Foundation on a new fuel buying for truck stops and travel centers toolkit. The goal of the toolkit was and is to give a broader understanding of the intricacies of fuel buying for your business. And we were so lucky to have you as a collaborator. Before we talk about the toolkit and some more fuel buying stuff, can you just tell us about TACenergy?
Sure. Thank you for that. And thank you for allowing us to collaborate. We certainly appreciated it. But at a high level, TACenergy is a national fuel supplier. When I say national, we're operating in the lower 48 states. So we're helping refiners get their product to the market and helping them deal with the complexities of, in their world, they think about millions of barrels per day, but they sell it to most users on a truck by truck basis. And so you can imagine there's a lot of complexities that are associated with that. And then we help on the other side of that, the fuel buyers themselves, which will hopefully be in part NATSO members or some people working with the NATSO members to get access to that fuel to make sure that they have competitively priced and reliably sustained supply chain for their fuel. And so along the way, in addition to bulk fuel, we'll provide them with such things as renewable fuels. We have branded programs that we can help with. If customers are worried about budgets, we can help them with their fixed price. If they need to keep a better tab on their inventories, we can help them manage those pieces. So at a high level, that's what we do.
Awesome. So like I said, we collaborated on the toolkit. You, me, Darren, a big team. We kind of worked on the outline and you guys fleshed it out, and then the foundation brought it to life. So tell us about the toolkit. What's in it?
Yep. So the toolkit is a list of things. If I'm worried about fuel from a truck stop perspective, what are the things that I care about? And so we tried to take a broad brush with it. So we start with some very basic things like, what is diesel? So we'll walk you through something as basic as that. But then we start to get into the more nuanced things. Here are some things that you need to be thinking about. So from a product perspective, we may look at, we mentioned some of the regulated things that you need to be mindful of. We talk about renewables. We spend a good bit of time talking about pricing mechanisms. There are a number of options that are out there. And so we want to make sure that the NATSO members know, hey, what are my options? How can I approach purchasing fuel? Do I have any blind spots? Is there anything that I can do better? And so we try to highlight, what those might be. And then we also talk about things, geopolitical issues that may be relevant, and those change. When we hang up from here, I'm sure there's somebody somewhere in the world is going to mess everything up. So when we talk about some of those, how to keep an eye out for those, we certainly lend our 2 cents worth of branded, unbranded. And ultimately, I think we end it with tips for how to choose a supplier. So as you're looking, what are some of the things that you as a NATSO member, as an owner of a truck stop, what are the things that you care about? Here are some things you might want to consider.
Is there any section of it that you think is going to be of the most interest to truck stops?
Well, I think interesting to a truck stop owner. I'm a fuel nerd. So, what I find interesting and what they might find interesting are two different things. But I do think, regardless of how interesting it might be from a subject perspective, as we talk about pricing mechanisms, I think that is certainly something that they need to dig into and understand. Because there are a lot of options out there. You've got a lot of jargon that's thrown about. And so what we try to do is take the veil off that, educate the members. When they say this, it means that. And so what you're really trying to do is have a more educated buyer out of the result of that. So even if you don't find it interesting, I do think you should find that important. It's good to understand that piece of it, because fuel is going to account for a large portion of your sales.
Yeah, it's huge. I want to ask you too, Darren. I know you were really the mastermind behind this, right? You were the one who kind of identified TACenergy as a good resource and said we should do this. What do you think our members struggle with the most when it comes to fuel buying?
So I think Randy nailed it. It's just the complexity of fuel buying. And it might surprise folks that sometimes these are large corporations that have never really dealt with what I'd call commercial fuel on diesel. And they move from the C-store world into our space, and the complexities, the pricing, all of those types of things that Randy just mentioned shock them. And so if you can imagine, if you're a single store operator and you decide that you'd like to build a truck stop, it can be incredibly challenging. So it's the complexity, which I'm so very grateful for TAC and you, Amy, putting this together, because it is challenging for someone who, again, buying gas, I'm not saying that's easy, but buying commercial fuel diesel is even more challenging, at least in my opinion. Randy, I'm not sure if you would agree with that statement, but our members find it incredibly complex.
Totally agree. And just to give you an example of somebody stepping into the space, you could be a completely sophisticated person, and if you were, let's say you were a senior vice president of procurement at another company in an adjacent field somewhere, and you bought on a spot basis, right? In a traditional procurement perspective, that means I don't necessarily have an agreed to price. I needed it today. I bought it today. You can certainly buy it that way, and it's something that we cover in the toolkit, that there's also an index running out there, one or two indices running out there that have spot in their name, right? And so what we try to do is, again, have that educated buyer. Okay, when I purchase on a spot basis or versus purchasing on a spot index, what do I mean by that? So it can be confusing, even to somebody that might consider themselves to be sophisticated outside the industry.
Okay, in the toolkit, TACenergy's COO, Fred Sloan, recommends considering offering E85 if you wish to improve your government sales. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So I think more broadly, what we're trying to do in the toolkit itself is, again, as we discussed earlier, is so let's evaluate options, right? We're all trying to get a competitive advantage. We're all trying to better understand what can I do to be a better truck stop and operate with better profits. So one of the things that Fred is suggesting, okay, if you have a large government fleets that are driving by your location, you being the guy in town that has E85 might be something to consider. Now, this is not something that is prescribed to everywhere to everyone, but I think what Fred is suggesting is if you can find that advantage, then take advantage. And so you would have, there's some other questions that would come out of that. But the first question is there demand? And if there is demand, what can we do to take advantage of it?
Okay. Do you have any recommendations on spot purchasing versus index-based purchasing?
Yes, we do. And we cover those in good detail in the toolkit. And so again, what we're not trying to do is 100% prescribe, if you don't buy an index, you're a moron. Now, we're not trying to suggest that by any stretch of the imagination, but we are suggesting in certain circumstances it makes a ton of sense. Yeah. I'm going to try to state this without offending. In the Colorado market, there is a certain provider that struggles from yes, we can keep the operations running perspective. If I depended on them on fuel exclusively on a spot buy basis, I would be very nervous. And so what you're looking at one of the key things that you need to be worried about from a spot purchasing, get the lowest price for today versus an index, you're trying to walk that proper balance between security of supply and lowest price. And so I don't always want to be on one end of those spectrum to the other. I may be in a market where I don't perceive I have a ton of risk, so I may lean toward the spot purchasing, and that's, again, lowest price for today. And if I am in a place that might be plagued with problems, such as our Colorado example, or if I'm sitting on the peninsula of Florida with hurricane season out and about, my desire to be on the security side of that equation might be a bit more than somebody that's sitting in a well-supplied market. And so again, as we walk through the tool, we're trying to educate the NATSO members. Here are the types of things that you need to be mindful of. It will be different by location, by market, and so we're just trying to help them understand what those nuances might be.
Do you get that question, Darren? The index versus spot?
So yes and no. So it's similar to what Randy kind of referenced right at the beginning. A lot of times they've just made a decision to go one or the other, versus trying to take a more balanced approach, which I love what Randy said. That's why I was smiling here, is it seems to be one or the other. And to Randy's point, I think that it's more nuanced, if that's fair to say, Randy. And I think you have to be more aware of really what makes the most sense for you where you're located.
Okay. In the toolkit, we do cover this, but I think it's worth repeating. What reports, indexes, or key indicators should travel centers be monitoring?
So I think from an index perspective, what types of things, the EIA releases a ton of really good data. Back in the day, back in the 40s, travel centers only accounted for maybe 30% of road use diesel, and that number is closer to 70% at this stage. And so if you look at the weekly EIA data, they'll give you price information, they'll give you demand information. So that is certainly something to keep an eye on. Another one is the ATA is publishing, a number of how much tonnage is being shipped. So if I care deeply about truck drivers and their ability to come to my location, those are two reports that I certainly would keep an eye out on.
Okay. So Randy, I've got a question for you. What's the summer outlook on fuel?
The summer outlook on fuel, the big question as you step into every summer is what is going to happen in the Gulf. Are we going to have was it 2017 where there was just a number of storms hitting in the Gulf? And the reason that we worry about that's where a large portion of the U.S. refineries are located. So the outlook for summer, the one big unknown is what's going to happen in hurricane season, and more specifically, where are the hurricanes going to land? Last year, we were predicted to have an active hurricane season, and I think we did. They just didn't come here to the U.S. So that is one thing to keep in mind, keep an eye out for. We're supposed to be even more active this season. The second thing that we're seeing is, unlike 2 to 3 years ago, there's more supply in the market than there has been. You see that reflected in some of the financial reporting of some of the publicly traded refiners. You see the crack spread, as it's described. Our ability to turn a barrel of crude oil into a refined product, how much money do we make from that? That's the crack spread. We're seeing those numbers compressed, and part of it is we've had some new refineries coming online internationally, but there's also the demand has softened somewhat, and so we have a softening of demand, and we have a global increase of refined products. So we are seeing that create some pressures on prices. So hopefully we'll see some prices go down.
Okay. So I've got one more question. I promise, Amy, it's my last question here, and it kind of came about your question about what I get asked. So I'm not at all a fuel expert, Randy, but I do get a lot of questions about fuel. So what kind of advice would you give to me related to what is the one thing a single store operator, so he or she who owns one travel center, what's the one thing they should do to really either sharpen their skills or to make sure they improve their profitability of fuel? Again, I know there's no one magic bullet, but I get that question a lot. Everyone's looking for the magic bullet. So if I was to tell them one thing, what would that be in your opinion?
and I'm going to say this for selfish reasons, so let's just be clear on that. But I think that making sure that you have a reliable partner is a key part of this. And that's not going to be just found in the prices that they present to you, but when you come to them with questions, help me understand this in the market, help me understand that. If they're just a commodity peddler, and so yes, you can maybe get a cheapest ever price out of them on that particular day, but if they're not reliable, the lowest price in the market is no good if it doesn't make its way into your tank, right? And so from our perspective, that's one thing that we would recommend is make sure you've got a good partner, a reliable partner, somebody that you can get on a phone that can answer your questions. If you need to visit with them, they will make the call or they'll come to your location. But again, that's one thing that's covered in the supply toolkit is make sure you're digging in. You've got somebody that you trust. Trust is a valuable commodity, so don't disvalue it.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Randy, because it is, as you referenced at the beginning, it is your largest revenue producing item you have on your property is fuel.
Yeah, and if it's not in your tank, it's not doing you any good.
So we both agree this is a question we get a lot at NATSO, and you also identified it. What are some concerns in moving towards higher levels of ethanol, such as E15 or E85?
So that is a fascinating debate. So if you look at, why would we want more ethanol? Well, we produce it locally. When I say locally, it's made mostly in the U.S. And so our farmer friends, we certainly want to take care of them. So a lot of our NATSO members are going to be in the Corn Belt. And so they're going to be more disposed to provide higher levels of ethanol than other locations. So there's a lot of things that would make it more desirable to use, but there are also some challenges with it. I don't know about the rest of you that might be listening to this call, but I do not let ethanol into my gas mower at home, right? Or my small engines. That same challenge that we see on those small engines, you could see if you look at, can I turn this tank into an ethanol E15 tank? Well, the EPA itself, who just in April said, we can open ethanol in summer months, is also saying, but just watch how your tank responds. And so they do recommend that you have somebody look at your tank to make sure it's compatible for higher levels of ethanol. So you have equipment concerns. You do lose some productivity, some efficiency out of higher levels of ethanol, but you can get it cheaper. So you've got to look at that. So the benefits to it is it's locally produced. It takes care of our neighbors. The challenges of it can cause some problems from equipment. You need to be prepared to evaluate that. And ethanol in water is a problem, right? So if you have a tank that is in a position that you get a lot of water runoff from rain, be careful with how much ethanol you're putting in that tank. It's exposed. So you just you can use it. It's good for our neighbors, but there's some things you just absolutely have to be careful about.
Okay, we thought we'd end with an easy question. What should travel centers be especially focused on in regards to renewable fuel?
Keep an eye on the changing regulations. I was on a conference call earlier this week with a company, and they were walking through some of the changes. You may be able to benefit from it, so you certainly want to stay in tune. Your customers may benefit from it, so you stay in tune to those. Right? For example, what we're seeing right now is traditionally, renewable diesel, which seems like showed up yesterday into all the markets, is flush in California. And so now you're seeing it make its way outside of Florida into Texas, into some other markets. And what that's being driven by in part is some incentives that are out there. In Texas, for example, you don't have to pay a state sales excise tax for the proportion that you're using on that renewable fuel. So the end user is getting some benefits out of it. We're seeing some other conversations elsewhere. And so stay in tune to the changes in those regulations, because they could benefit you as and or your customers as you use them. So it's very important to stay in tune to those. And we are seeing some changes at the end of this year, which creates some uncertainty. We're moving from what has been a blender's credit for a number of years, where I get $1 credit for every gallon of biodiesel I blend. It's moved to a domestic producer's credit. In other words, it's not because I blended it, it's because I made it. And it's not $1, it's 30 cents plus some incentives if you use really clean stuff. So your carbon intensity score goes down. So in truth, we as who are well ingrained into this industry don't quite understand what the fallout is going to be. So stay tuned. Stay tuned to what's going on in your legislature. Stay tuned in what you're seeing in as the implications of the changes and regulations come into play. It will affect your access to it. And so it may bring product into the market. It may create some challenges in your market getting access to it. So I would just say keep a close eye on it. It's a changing environment. Make sure you understand what those changes are.
Okay. Now, for real, I'm going to hit you with my surprise fun questions. They're very easy, I promise. Your face. Okay, so these are the fun questions we just asked before we let you go. What is your go-to on the road snack?
Okay, so if I'm in the airport, like I do a lot of, or if I'm traveling in a car for our NATSO members, I do a lot of that too. But I just seem to be more vulnerable at it in an airport because it's right. I love a whatchamacallit. I'm telling you, if you get the whatchamacallits laying there, it's not good. Hopefully my wife's not listening, but I love a good whatchamacallit.
That's funny. Do you prefer to ride or drive?
Drive. I think I prefer to drive. And I think I've been trained that way because my wife does not prefer to drive. Therefore, by definition, I have to prefer to drive. So.
Okay. If you're stuck in a snowstorm in a truck stop, how do you pass the time?
Stuck in a snowstorm. So I'm from the South, as my accent probably reveals. So if I'm stuck in a truck stop in the snow, I'm wondering why I didn't get my milk like weeks ago. In the South, that's why it happens. I would be drinking tons of coffee because I love coffee, and I would be reading, and that's how I would spend it. So coffee and a good book.
Perfect segue to our last question, which is how do you take your truck stop coffee?
Black.
Like
Jesus liked it.
Oh, thank you, Randy. Well, thank you for collaborating with us on the Toolkit. I always ask people where they can how they get in touch with you, and then they say go to our website. So TACenergy.com?
Yep, TACenergy.com. So you will be able to find us there. And certainly you can find me on my LinkedIn page, Randy Grizzle, Drizzle with a G, Grizzle. So feel free to hit me up there. But I do appreciate the opportunity to work with you guys. Hopefully the members find this useful. And if you have any need for a fuel nerd, please reach out.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Darren. Thanks, guys. Thank you for listening to today's episode of The Truck Stops Here. You can find us online at natso.com/podcast. If you have any questions or if you want to come onto the podcast, please reach out to me at atoner@natso.com. Goodbye.
The Truck Stops Here was brought to you by the NATSO Foundation, the research, education, and public outreach subsidiary of NATSO. The Truck Stops Here is produced by the NATSO Foundation in collaboration with Human Factor. Producers are Amy Toner and Darren Schulte.